Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.
This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad, and we have another special guest with us tonight. It's Mr. Pete Bigelow from Car and Driver Magazine.
To be here, guys. Thank you for having me tonight.
It's yet another Autoblog alumnus here on the show this week.
I feel like that club is bigger than the actual amount of staff at Autoblog right now.
Yeah, there's a bit of a diaspora from Autoblog.
Well, it's been around a while.
It is fantastic that we're all from the Autoblog family tree, so to speak, and good to see where everybody has wound up.
Yeah, it's really cool. Some of us have done a lot better than others. I count myself as the others.
Hey, you're gainfully employed.
Yeah.
You're paying your bills, right?
That's true. I never got to sit at the right hand of Brock Yates or even Chapachetta like I wanted to when I was like 12, and I'm okay with that now.
You gotten over it?
Yeah. So
even Pete doesn't get to sit with Chubba anymore. I mean,
that's true.
Was Chubba, when you started, was Chubba still there, or had he already moved to Colorado?
He had already left the office at that point, and I have not, unfortunately, even had an opportunity to meet him yet.
Oh, really? That's too bad. He's pretty cool. I like Chubba.
Well, I will have to reach out and next time I'm out skiing in Colorado or something, maybe we can arrange a meeting.
You should definitely do that.
All right, I'll take that advice.
All right. Well, laments aside, we're going to start with what we're driving. And Sam, what are you in this week?
I just turned back the 2018 Kia Stinger GT with the twin turbo 3.3 liter V6, and damn, that's a good car.
I was going to underplay it and say everything I've heard about that car is that it's terrible. So everybody,
well, you've clearly been talking to the wrong people. I have no clue what they're talking about.
The automotive world is on fire about how good the Stinger is, and so why did you find it that way?
Well, first of all, it has a real name, and it's a cool name. It's a sports sedan, and they called it Stinger.
Yeah.
I mean, what could be better than that? None of this alphanumeric nonsense.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, it sounds like there's like, I don't know. The name is a little hyperbolic for me. It's kind of like, Stinger, Super B, like, I don't know. I can go both ways on the names. I'm kind of like,
Yeah, but in a world of Q60s and CT6s and RLXs, Stinger's cool.
That's true.
I think for the general, automotive populace out there, I tend to agree with Sam and perhaps Dan. I would agree with you a little bit on the, for those of us who pay attention to such things, it sounds a little too much like Stingray. So perhaps they could have been more original.
Yeah, well, when last week was a pretty good example of the alphanumeric sort of tripping us all up. I could not figure out the Infinity model lineup at all. Like which cars were? I knew the old ones, but I don't. They've changed everything, so it's hard to keep up with. So I guess it's a name. It's a memorable name. That's fine, but it sounds like the car itself is actually that much more memorable.
Yeah, I mean it's really good to drive. I like the size of it. Especially if you want something that's going to be fun to drive, but can also still accommodate a family. The back seats are plenty roomy, but it's not too huge. And with 365 horsepower from the twin turbo V6, it's got plenty of grunt. It'll get up and go, and it feels good to drive it. Especially if you put it in sport mode. If you just put it in sport and just leave it there all the time, it's great. Sometimes in comfort mode, there would be an occasional the shifts would occasionally feel maybe a little bit lazy or coming later than you would expect them to. But especially for downshifts. But in sport mode, it seemed really well sorted out, and it's got decent steering feel. It's everything is really well laid out in there. There's not so many features that you're overwhelmed by all the controls in there, but it's got all the things you would expect in a modern car. It's got good, comfortable seats, great steering wheel. The screen is, it's one of the typical ones today where it's standing up on top of the dashboard, so it's relatively close to your line of sight. But it still has, it's a touch screen, but it has rotary volume and controls and climate control knobs. So I think it's really well executed. The materials feel really good, and at a starting price, it's I think $33,000 starting price for the 4-cylinder rear wheel drive, and then on up to I think this one was about 47. This is a pretty well loaded one with the panoramic moonroof. And one of the things I like about the Stinger, is that it is, it's a hatchback, so it's got the coupe-like profile, but it's actually a hatchback, like the Audi S5 and A5. So it's actually got a lot of practicality. If you've got to carry some bigger stuff, you can drop the back seats down. You've got a nice big opening to, if you find something interesting at a garage sale or an estate sale on the weekend, you can throw it in the back there, or throw a couple of bikes back there. So it's it's both practical, and it looks really sharp, and has great proportions. Maybe I think some people have said it's maybe a tad overstyled, with the vents, the cooling vents on the fenders behind the front wheels.
I can get behind that impression. It looks a little bit like it's got a little bit of gingerbread on it. Yeah,
but I can. It's not so much that it's not like it's got some big gigantic Type R wing on the back. So it's there's a few elements that it could probably do without, but I can certainly live with them.
Yeah, it's so for me, my biggest concern when a Hyundai Kia sort of hot rod model comes out, and they've been doing a lot better at this over the last couple of years, it's always been the ride handling chassis rigidity trade-off. And from all accounts, that seems to be really well sorted here, and it drives like they've been doing quite a lot of homework.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not it's not plush by any means, especially on the big wheels that are on there. But it's still comfortable. It did a fine job of soaking up the what passes for roads around here. And it's got good body control. So it doesn't bounce around when you hit the potholes or frost heaves. Keeps things well under control, and soaks up enough to keep the body from bouncing around while still letting what's going on at the road surface. Have you driven the Stinger, Pete?
I have not, so I'm interested in your perspective here. Learning a lot right now.
Yeah, I mean, this same platform is also going to underpin the upcoming Genesis G70, which is their smaller, their mid-size model that's coming up, slot in below the G80, and I think Kia has done a really nice job of using the same hardware that you find in a Hyundai, but giving it definitely a distinct look. Maybe not, I think, in maybe not as distinct a feel, but certainly a distinct look, and so you won't mistake, a Kia for a Hyundai or a Genesis for that matter. The Genesis brand has been separated enough from Hyundai from a design standpoint that they don't look like they're all part of the same family.
Yeah, and the G70 is another car that everybody's really kind of awaiting with bated breath. Pete, you have the opportunity though to be there at the sort of the offices in Ann Arbor. So is there an attitude floating around there other than what we read maybe in the magazine that about the Stinger? What else have you picked up about it? Or is everybody quiet?
I have not. Picked up much about it right now, but that's probably just because my attention has been on the self-driving world so much these days.
And I'm sure they're all good poker players.
Well, and the Stinger's got the usual array of driver assist features. It's got a lane keeping system and adaptive cruise control and blind spot monitoring and all that stuff. And the lane keeping system, like most current Hyundai and Genesis and Kia models, actually does a surprisingly good job of trying to keep the car largely centered in the lane. It unlike some of the systems like Super Cruise or Volvo Autopilot that actually try to hold the lane all the way down to a stop. As if you're coming to a stop, the ones that are labeled just as driver assist as opposed to partially automated systems, they typically cut out somewhere around 35 or 40 miles an hour for the lane keeping part of it. But on the highway, it does a pretty nice job of tracking the lanes.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, with everybody going toward crossovers and abandoning sedans, what is the idea for them to bring out this kind of, and it's not even a sedan, it's a hatchback, but this really seems like kind of the direct opposite of where the buyers are. They're, basically they're coming out with a premium sports sedan offering at a time where everybody's kind of leaving that.
Yeah, unfortunately that is true. And, I think, when they went through the product planning process on the Stinger and the G70 a few years back, I think like with many of the rest of the Hyundai Motor Group lineup, they definitely biased it more towards cars than utilities. And, this is kind of the last of that generation, and it'll probably be a little while before we see any more significant new cars from Hyundai Motor Group. We're going into a phase now where we're going to see a whole bunch of new utility vehicles that, from all three brands, from Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis, over the next year and a half, 2 years. Just the same as what we're getting from a lot of other companies as well. But I think Genesis has three different utilities, three different size utilities coming. Hyundai's got they've got a new Santa Fe coming. They've got the Kona that's launching in the next few weeks on sale, and they'll have updates to the Tucson and other utilities. They've got some other stuff coming as well. So there's going to be this whole slate of new SUVs and crossovers from all three of the brands.
Though with their luck, it may arrive just in time. We'll have some sort of unexpected spike in fuel prices that will drive people back toward sedans and smaller cars.
Yeah, that may happen. Although as part of that plan, for all these utilities, Hyundai's doing a lot of electrification as well. So they're they've got an all electric, a battery electric version of the Kona that's launching later this year. They showed it at the Geneva show a couple of weeks ago. Which at least in Europe anyway is supposed to be rated at 290 miles of range. There's hybrid versions of most of the other utilities coming, both some strong hybrids and I think also some 48-volt mild hybrids coming as well. So I think they'll probably be fine. I don't think they're going to be launching anything that's going to be too thirsty with fuel.
Good point, Sam. Good point.
Yeah, well, and they have the turbo, the 4-cylinder version of the Stinger. So, at the very least, if they absolutely had to, they could drop the V6 and say we'll get back to that once gas prices or fuel economy requirements change. But the numbers it puts up are just they're pretty astounding. It's very quick. Looking at Car and Driver, they got a 12.9 second 0 to 60 out of it. Out of the
You mean quarter mile?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Quarter mile. 12.90 to 60 is like the 80s.
Yeah, that would not be so impressive.
Yeah, no, it's like a 4.4 second 0 to 60. Like that's a blazing quick car.
Yeah, and this is a car I enjoyed driving a whole lot more than the old Genesis Coupe. I mean, to a degree, both the Stinger and the G70 are really kind of replacements for the Genesis Coupe, which never really seemed to find a foothold in the marketplace.
I mean, the Genesis Coupe felt so rough around the edges. I was actually shocked at how much that felt like a Mustang to me. I had the 2-liter, the turbo version of that back years ago when it was first introduced, and I was so excited to try it, and it reminded me of an SVO Mustang, which it's not bad, but it was definitely not as refined as you'd think.
Yeah, no, that was definitely true. Did you ever drive the Genesis Coupe, Pete?
No, I don't think I did.
I drove it in, the last time I drove one was before they did the mid-cycle refresh in about 2012 or 13, I think. Which made it a little more interesting looking, but it wasn't a terrible car, but it definitely never really quite lived up to, I think, what was expected of it, especially given the Genesis branding. But of course, it was also still a Hyundai then as well. Genesis wasn't a separate brand at the time. I think this one, the Stinger and I'm sure the G70 are definitely far superior vehicles. So speaking of consuming fuel, I think you had something that fits more into that category.
I certainly did, but I would like to how about we do this? How about we get Pete talking, and then we come back to what I'm driving, because Pete admitted that he's actually in the market for a family vehicle, and so
that's correct.
I'm really curious, and I know Sam, you are too. Is like, okay, now is like the chance to ask the doctor what he does when he has a cold. Like, what does a car and driver editor buy for a car or shop for?
Yeah, it's almost like the tyranny of too many choices when you, live and breathe some of these cars every day, or at least see them in the office. So I'll give you a quick rundown on my situation. Would be currently have in the family fleet a 16 Chrysler Town and Country minivan and a 16 Subaru Forester, both leased, and those end 8 to 10 months out. So I'm not quite in the market yet, but definitely thinking about what will happen then. Five of us in the family, including the 3 kids. So I think at least one minivan is a requirement.
Yeah.
But not sure if we will keep the Town and Country or maybe get a new Pacifica. And then on the Subaru side, keep the Forester or maybe look at a new 3-row Subaru Ascent. And at the same time, I don't want to have both new cars be bigger vehicles, so that I'd prefer to have at least one in the family fleet be fuel efficient. So those are all my thoughts right now, kind of at the onset of starting to seriously think about what comes next.
So let me ask you this, Pete. I mean, you drive from Dexter into Ann Arbor every day, so what, about 15 miles or so each way to the office?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit less than that. So
okay.
not all that far.
So if you had the minivan in the family, who would be the primary driver of that, you or your wife?
It really probably winds up being, it's 50-50 to 60-40. We both wind up doing a lot. It kind of depends on, who's got a meeting that lets out and who's picking up the kids or dropping them off. And so I would not say that there's a primary or reliably primary driver of one car versus the other.
So have you considered the Pacifica hybrid, the plug-in hybrid?
I've considered it a little bit, but at the same time with Stow and Go not available, because that's where the battery packs are.
Right.
It's kind of
only
like
for the second row. You still get the Stow and Go for the third row.
You do, but I use the second row a lot we're reconfiguring seats in the current car often. So it's that would be a big negative to me, as would be the extra price for the hybrid.
Well, you do still get the $7,500 tax credit on the hybrid. So there is that, so, I mean, it starts at like 41, and with the tax credit, you're down into the mid 30s.
Not to be overlooked.
Yeah. But, the loss of the second row stow and go is definitely a very valid point. On the other hand, the Ascent, that's a big SUV.
Yes, it is. And we don't have that now. It's kind of funny. You would think that I'd be the one to be eager to get, beyond the minivan stage, but, I don't care. It really functions well. But it's my wife who I'd say is probably more eager to ditch the minivan and all of its kind of suburban baggage than I am.
Yeah, that's something that I've found. A lot of car writers, we have no problem saying, you know what, it's definitely not. It has no pretense other than being a utility vehicle, the minivan. So we all wind up loving wagons and minivans without any problem. We admit the stigma and we don't care.
Yes.
The rest of the world seems to be hung up on it. And it's like, well, look, you're going to have a minivan because your kids are going to destroy it. It's going to, it's like, it's there because you need it and it's so handy. And I know.
Two sliding doors.
Yeah.
Man, that rocks.
My kids.
I think of how many times our kids would have dented a car parked next to us if they had to open doors versus just sliding the minivan ones open.
Yeah, and my kids actually love minivans because they can see out of them. The windows come down. They have low sort of door sills. So the windows are large, and they have captain's chairs. Maybe if you have, you can get it configured so they have the bench, I think, in the second row too. So that kind of depends on what you buy, but they feel like little royalty riding around in a minivan.
Yeah, they're not, once you're on the inside and not looking at the outside, it's perfectly fine.
So the decision there's a big difference between the town and country, and the 16 must have been like the last year you could get the town and country.
It was the very last one. We got a nice steep discount on it because I think they were trying to push them off the lot.
So there's definitely a big discernible difference between that and the Pacifica. On the other hand, there's also a price difference. And so it sounds like you have that consideration, like you might just buy out the lease and continue with that one.
Well, I think if we're going to buy out a lease, I'd be more likely to do it on the Forester because it's a perfectly good car that we've both enjoyed. The only downside to it, I would say, would be that if we wanted to get all three kids into it, we can barely pack them into the back.
Yeah.
So it functions well as, in a pinch, but the kids are not getting smaller. And, I think we might prefer the extra inch or two that the Outback provides.
Yeah.
In that case.
So they keep growing if you keep feeding them. That's the issue I've had.
Yeah.
How old are they? How big?
9, 6, and 6.
Oh yeah. You're done for.
We'll get an inch or two back when the 6-year-olds get out of their booster seats at some point, but that's quickly going to be eaten up.
Yeah, the Outback's a good choice too because it'll have that longevity, where it's a bigger wagon, so it's going to be able to accommodate a few more years of kids getting larger, activities getting more involved with more stuff, and just it should hang on a little bit longer than a Forester. Although, I think back, like the amount of stuff we used to do with like escort wagons was astounding.
Yeah, I think that that could be a way we lean, and I don't know. I'm kind of like, on one hand, I know the Forester that we've had has been a good, reliable car, and we've taken good care of it. So, there's a lot to be said for staying that particular course, and then just making sure that all the kids can fit in the other car, more than comfortably for long road trips and and getting back and forth to school, and like you said, for carrying all the stuff that's inevitably going to really trash out the car.
Yeah, I mean, you add a dog, it's all over.
That's coming too.
See, you're screwed.
That's what seat covers are for. I have the seat cover. I have the seat cover that can hook over the headrests, and so when I need to take the dog somewhere, I just throw that on there, and so she doesn't make a big mess.
Yeah, or you just get like one of those little teacup chihuahuas, and you can tuck it in the glove compartment. It'll be fine.
No, I like real dogs.
So, I mean, but with car and driver on your resume, like it's got to be the 3 Series GT, or do they still make the 5 Series GT?
It's a 6 Series now.
6 Series. Okay. Yeah.
There is definitely an aspect of, what do I want to drive into the office parking lot with on a daily basis? And I will tell you, I'm not the only one with the Town and Country, but it's definitely not the most popular choice in the office.
Well, yeah.
Panamera Sport Turismo.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a wagon. Actually,
yeah.
What about a Volvo V90?
That would be fine with me. I'm not sure what the price point would be as compared to the Subaru, but that would be a nice choice as well.
The interesting thing is I just I wrote a script about the Care by Volvo thing, and it looks like right now that's just XC40s, but if you could get that with a V90, because it's about $600 a month, I think was the $600 to $700 a month, depending on the actual
for the XC40.
Yeah,
I remember reading that.
I think so. The XC40 T5 is $600 a month, and the T6 and the all-wheel drive one is $700.
And that includes the insurance and maintenance and everything.
That's everything. And when you think about it, it sounds expensive, but it's kind of not.
When you start adding all that stuff up,
you're right.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
And in a year, you can get a new one. So, I mean, I'm assuming that it's if they offer the V90 at some point, it's not going to be that cheap. It'll be something, a little bit more expensive, but the same kind of program. But that has a lot of merit as at a place in your life where you go, you know what, we're just going to have to pay for the car for a while.
What about the Buick Regal Tour X?
Are you asking me, Sam?
Yeah.
I had not put that on my radar.
I mean, it's a wagon.
It's big like the Outback.
It's a slightly crossover-ish wagon. It's all-wheel drive. And it looks good. It's probably worth taking a look at.
Based on your recommendation only, I will take I will at least put it on my list and take a once over at it. But I don't know. That's an interesting thought. I had not considered that.
I detect a little Buick trepidation.
Well,
he's coming from a Chrysler. How bad could it be?
I think I'm not quite, in the average Buick owner age range just yet.
I think that's what they're working on.
They're not even putting the Buick name on them anymore. So
that's true.
You just have the 3-shield badge, but no name.
There's got to be a market. I know that there were people who were rebadging their Chevrolet SSs as Holdens. You get the Australian market Holden badges and retrofit the car.
I'm sure you could get some Holden or Opel badges.
I was going to say you could get Opel badges or Saab badges, because if you close your eyes, like that is a modern day 9.3 wagon.
I think GM actually even offered, like through the parts division, you could actually order Holden badges directly from GM.
That's right. I think
put onto an SS.
You could actually order the SS with the badges already affixed, I believe. If I recall.
Okay.
I priced one out and I was very excited, and then they only had black interiors, and so that sunk it for me. Also, nobody in anywhere near my house had manual transmissions. They offered it with manuals, but apparently no dealers stocked it. So yeah. It's also not a great family car.
Probably lacking just a little bit in that respect. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's a big sedan, but like every time, it's one of those cars that's so special, you know, and you know that they've already killed it. You know that they're not going to continue making that for that long. So you're going to cringe every time like somebody drops a French fry in it. You're just like, no. It's not a good family car. Great press car though, where you can just like, yeah, whatever.
Because you know somebody else is going to be responsible for detailing it next week.
Yeah, they do such a great job.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know if we've solved the problem or just made it worse.
Probably made it worse, but we're good at that.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate the insight.
You know, I mean, so we can actually get to the car that I was driving this week, which would actually be a really good choice for you if you have unlimited funds for fuel. I drove the Nissan Armada Platinum Reserve, and Platinum Reserve sounds to me like some kind of bad like whiskey blend from the 70s. And there's no avoiding the fact that it's just a large vehicle, and some people are offended by that. One of my coworkers made sure to tell me how stupid he thought the Armada was, and it's not though. I quite like it. It's based on the Nissan Patrol, so it's got some serious capability.
That means it can handle Michigan potholes.
Yeah, it can handle a lot. It's a real truck, so it's got a full frame. It's got the I think they call it now the Endurance V8, so it's the 5.6 liter. It's almost 400 horsepower. It's a big burly thing, and it sounds good. It's plenty powerful. 7-speed automatic. It has all-wheel drive, but it's locking transfer case, I believe. So, quite capable of just about anything you're going to throw at it. But it's also really, really comfortable, especially in Platinum Reserve trim. You can get the Armada in like SV trim, which starts. It's a little pricey. It starts at like 48 as SV with the all-wheel drive. The Platinum Reserve was more than that. I don't have the exact price in front of me, but it was not super cheap. It's also kind of like a starter Infinity at that point. It's pretty close to a QX80.
Pretty much.
It has nice leather, and it's got all the doodads, and it was cushy, and but it's 3 rows. It's a big SUV, so I got the whole family in it, and everybody was comfortable. My kids are 12 and 10, so a little bigger than yours, Pete. But we had the dog, so he had his own row, and
okay,
he's not a huge dog. He's about 50
animal
pounds.
To have its own row like that.
Yeah.
The Platinum Reserve starts at $62,000.
Yeah. That's not terrible for what it is. I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's a lot of vehicle too, and that's the thing where, people who complain about big SUVs kind of don't get the point of the big SUVs. Like, they're not going to get great fuel economy, but you need the space, you need the capability. If you ever wanted to, tow something or needed that capability, towing your RV and taking the whole family, like it's going to do it without a problem.
Or just towing your house along.
Yeah, or towing your house.
What kind of fuel economy did you get?
It was in the teens. It was, solidly around 15.
It gets some miles per gallon.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, multiple miles per gallon.
Yeah, it's in the double digits.
Yeah,
what more could you ask for?
But it's not. Yes, but for that, like, you can hook 8,500 pounds up to it and throw 1,800 pounds almost inside. So there's 1,700 pounds inside. That's pretty good. That's a lot of capability.
It is, and to your point, thinking about it now, it's amazing how fuel economy probably used to be like my top consideration or one of them, and now it's not. It's about versatility in the cabin and just flexibility in a sense of fitting a family of 5 now comfortably in a vehicle.
Yeah, it's sort of the trade-off. I mean, one of the things is that fuel is kind of inexpensive, so it's less of a concern here.
Yeah. Yes.
right now. I think if fuel were to go up, it would have to go up a lot, though. It'd have to go up at least $1, I think, per gallon, before it really you start to hear complaints. And even at that, it's still like you grumble a little bit, but overall, we still just continue to do what we do. Certainly, people at the margins would be affected, but and it would cool sales of these maybe. But I feel like if you're spending $60,000-$70,000 on a pretty well loaded traditional SUV, you're not going to have an issue with filling it.
It's not your make or break moment. Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Pete, when did you say your timeline was for replacing your cars?
About 8 months out for the start of it.
Okay. Because the other thing to consider too is, I mean, there's some stuff that's in the pipeline that hasn't been revealed yet, but some stuff that's coming. We talked about last week. What Ford was discussing last week they've got a whole bunch of new SUVs coming, and they announced that all of their SUVs going forward are going to offer hybrid or plug-in hybrid powertrains. Starting with the new Escape and the Explorer, which should be coming within the next year. So depending on what your time frame is, that's another one to consider if you do want to bias more towards fuel economy.
Yeah.
And there's also some other hybrid utilities out there, like the Toyota Highlander. The current generation Highlander is actually pretty decent. It's gotten a lot better over the years.
Yeah, that is a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you want the V8. So you definitely want something like the Armada, because you just put the pedal down and it just roars. So I totally used it as a family car, and I felt that some of the stuff, the family car stuff, it's nice that it's there, but it also didn't work as well as I had wished it would have. They had a power lift gate. It kind of takes its time going up and down, which I think I would be unhappy about in a downpour. The power folding rear seats, and so if you're trying to load it up, you can fold that third row. You just hold the button and it folds down. They also take their sweet time to fold. So, at least at that point you're under the lift gate, so you're somewhat sheltered. But that stuff could work better. The lift over height, and this is an issue with I think any SUV like this, is the lift over height's high, and the rear bumper sticks out, so you get muck on your pants, especially right now in the winter when you try to put stuff in it if you're not careful. So there was a couple demerits there, but it's a lot of space, it's a lot of capability. I thought 8,500 pounds towing it's good, but it's the pickup truck market, they're all beating the hell out of each other with tow ratings, so that actually seems low, and that may be just perspective. I will never be towing 8,500 pounds, but I thought it would be more at that.
Yeah, I mean the full size pickup segment now, you're looking, at 12 to 12,500 pounds is what you need to have to be competitive anymore. Yeah,
and I mean that's such a paper, like that's an armchair quarterback number, because that's a lot. I don't even.
Well, if you're towing a 20-foot Airstream, that gets up over 10,000 pounds.
Yeah, and however many hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like this is the thing. It's like, who's got a 20-foot Airstream, man?
How many of those do they sell these days?
They're popular.
I think every automaker has a couple of them that they haul out for their launch programs whenever they bring a new truck to market.
I mean, like you would certainly have no problem with a pretty nicely sized like J Feather or some other kind of more lightweight, more affordable trailer. The one feature that really stood out to me, and partly is because they made big noises about it in the press release, was their new intelligent rearview mirror. I guess they debuted it on the Platinum Reserve Armada. So it's like the Cadillac mirror that it turns into a display for the rear camera. When you just flip a switch, and I can see the use case that they talk about is like if the block rearward is the view rearward is blocked. But when you're going down the road and you have stuff in the car blocking the interior rearview mirror, you've still got your exterior mirrors, and what's behind you, you can pick it up from those mirrors, and it kind of counts less. So when you're maneuvering, it's that's really when you need that mirror, and to flip it into basically camera mode. The resolution of the screen, I thought it made it really tough for me to figure out what I was looking at as I'm trying to drive this big thing. So I didn't feel comfortable. Because
it was too small, or
it was too small, and just it's this weird. I don't know. Like, I just wasn't seeing enough detail. It freaked me out. I'm maneuvering this big truck around, and I'm trying to make sense of this display, and it if I spent more time with it, it probably would be okay. But also the rear camera comes up on the center display, so you can just look there, or at least the overhead camera does. The Nissan sort of
360 view,
which is very helpful. And I still know how to use my mirrors, so it's just like that's my default. So I thought it was actually less useful than they make it out to be. But everybody's trying these new things. I still feel like the value of screens in cars is dubious and
to be determined at best.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that a lot of both the automakers and the suppliers are working. They're trying to get this stuff sorted out now with these display mirrors, because with the goal of eventually, when the regulations are changed, to allow them to get rid of the exterior mirrors, because the mirrors on the outside of the car, that's a big source of aerodynamic drag.
Is it really that big?
Yeah, it's pretty significant, and also wind noise. So they would love to get rid of those outside mirrors, and replace them with cameras.
I think that's a terrible idea. There's
also another factor too, besides the aero and the wind noise, because a lot of people misadjust their mirrors. They don't really have them set properly so they can see as much as they should. That's true. And if you have the cameras there in place, regardless of what position you're sitting in, they can always be set to give you the right field of view, and display that on the displays on the inside of the car, regardless of where you might be sitting, whether you're tall or short, sitting up close to the wheel or far back. Those will always be set correctly.
Okay. I can buy that. That's engineers solving a problem.
and on a plus side, if you got rid of them, if you got rid of the side view mirrors, it's such a hassle from a consumer perspective, because they're so easy to knock off on the side of your garage. Not that I've ever done that, or other people are knocking them off somewhere, and they're expensive to replace. So from a consumer perspective, I like the idea that here's this part that is expensive, and now there's the prospect that, although I'm probably paying more for the technology in the car, there's at least the idea that I'm not going to have to go out and replace it at some point. Yeah. Or I'm less likely to have to replace it at some point.
I mean, you can probably get a camera that's very small. We call them lipstick cameras, or we used to back in the day. Just really tiny, wide-angle video cameras. And they're so small now that they can be pretty well protected and give you a decent image, at least much smaller than the full mirror assemblies.
Yeah, well, I mean, think of the size of the camera module in your phone. I mean, it's tiny.
Yeah.
That's all you need.
I would just the problem I have with that is just the resolution of the displays and being able to quickly understand what you're looking at. And you're going from something that, a mirror, a physical mirror, you understand that optical system. It all makes sense. The resolution is limited by your eyeballs. It's not, because you're just bouncing images. You're not now dealing with interpreting a field of view that's alien, because it's a camera. It's a 10-degree lens. So it's a 10 millimeter lens that has a 120-degree field of view. That's just that's a lot. You don't normally take in a view like that. You have to make sense of it and figure out.
Objects in mirror are closer than they appear.
Exactly. one of the things I used to like was the in the older Volvos, you could get the side reducing mirrors, which were not legal here, but you could get the part number for the glass and have it shipped from Europe. And so side reducing mirrors used to have a little bit of a concave, I think, segment just at the outer couple inches. So they give you this little extra edge where you could see your blind spot. And it was different than the U.S. sort of regulated mirrors. So that took a little while to get used to, but it's still this other thing. It's another thing you have to get used to. And I don't know. I'm getting really picky now. So I'll just say that cameras are coming and screens are coming, and I'm just going to have to get used to it and continue to. I'll keep complaining because that's what I do. And if we wanted to complain, we've had a really good week of things to complain about.
We certainly have.
Two companies I personally love to despise are in the news, but the one that I think is the most pertinent is Uber had an issue in Arizona that everybody's trying to make sense of, where one of their self-driving cars actually caused a fatality, and the video just got released tonight. And it appears that there's a lot of different failures. One of them was a distracted backup driver. The others, the car just apparently didn't detect this pedestrian that it should have caught. And you know, it's an unfortunate situation. It calls into question the future of Uber's program, but also just overall how far along this autonomous driving stuff is. So. We're going to riff on that for a little while. What's your take on that, guys?
Pete, you want to go first?
Sure. I guess just to, go off of what Dan said, I think it's more of a statement about Uber than the, greater self-driving future. At least, for people who have been watching this develop closely for a number of years, whether in the industry or just outside of it. Obviously on one hand, I feel like the first death caused by a fully self-driving system has been an eventuality. We all knew it was going to come at some point, and now this week is that point. So, assuming that people have been preparing for that and have contingencies in place, I don't think that this really alters the broader future. On the other hand, Uber is this company that seems to have gaffe after scandal, after problem, and now a death. And I think this is not a good sign for a company that's already besieged. And they had the trade secrets lawsuit after they, that they settled, and this is just the latest and the worst in a multiple years long string of problems. And, so I think for a company that is relying on self-driving technology to be its future, as Travis said, more than a year ago now, I think at this point that's the key to making the profitability over the long term. This is a very, very problematic thing for the company, and obviously really, really sad that somebody's life has been lost.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think Uber has a long history of problematic behavior. And one of the things that came out during that lawsuit that you mentioned, was some messages that went back and forth between Travis Kalanick, the former CEO, and Anthony Lewandowski, the ex Waymo engineer that went to Uber, about having to take shortcuts. Needing to get shortcuts in order to catch up and pass Waymo in the self-driving race, because he, you mentioned, that Travis basically described autonomous vehicles as an existential threat to Uber, and I think that's true. But I'm not sure that that Uber developing its own autonomous vehicles is necessarily something that's going to be a solution for them.
Well, I mean, Uber seems like an existential threat to Uber at this point.
They're self-inflicted wounds.
And I think what's really stands out too is here you have a company that has as you said, this is a history of rule breaking, and a history of rule breaking in the self-driving realm. Like they defied California regulators when they wanted to test there and refused to get a permit. And, not only is that why they wound up in Arizona for, which obviously impacts this lady who's now dead, but I think that just contributes to this history of a company's problematic behavior in terms of complying with regulation and rules, which really, are needed in the self-driving realm. I think we'd all agree now. If there's one sobering, thought that I think, has come so far here in the first 48 hours, it's that, more people are realizing that regulations are needed, and we can talk about what those are and what works best. But, these cars operating in a vacuum is not the best solution.
Well, so yeah, let's pull on that thread about regulations. What do you think? What do you think they are, and what do you think is needed?
Sam, you want to take that?
Sure. So, I've actually been saying this for some time that, I think we need some regulations, and certainly, excuse me, I think the argument that we don't want to overregulate these because we don't want to stifle the development of the technology is valid. But I don't think that necessarily means we need a completely laissez-faire approach to this problem either. If you think about it, if you look at the parallel between the human driver and the virtual driver, the computer driver in an autonomous vehicle, one of the what they're looking at right now, to the degree that they're looking at regulations at all in Congress, it's they're looking at they want to put a law in place that would exempt autonomous vehicles from certain of the federal motor vehicle safety standards that don't really apply to autonomous vehicles. Things like the requirement to have steering wheel and pedals and a few other things that are needed for a normal human driven vehicle. Because if there's no human driving it, you obviously don't need those things. At the same time, it also codifies the idea that we'll continue with the split that we have between the federal government and the states, where the federal government traditionally has regulated the safety standards for the vehicles themselves, but the states have been responsible for licensing and registration of drivers and of vehicles. Well, in an autonomous vehicle, instead of a human being the driver, you have a software and hardware stack that is now the driver, a virtual driver, as John Krafcik has called it. And in that case, why shouldn't that virtual driver have licensing requirements, just as a human driver does? Why shouldn't that virtual driver be required to demonstrate that it knows the basic rules of the road? Or, for example, when you and I go to get a driver's license or renew a driver's license, we have to take an eye exam to prove that we can actually see, right? And why shouldn't the same thing apply to a virtual driver? Why shouldn't it take the equivalent of an eye exam, and be required to demonstrate that the sensor system can actually see the things that it needs to see in order to navigate around the world? And so what I'd like to see happen, because clearly the current administration in Washington is unlikely to do anything of note in terms of adding new regulations, is to see the states, perhaps work with SAE, the Society of Automotive Engineers, to develop a standard, have SAE develop a standard, as they do for many things, for how you test the sensing systems, and evaluate them. You need to be able to detect a pedestrian at some distance, or pedestrian or cyclist at some distance in various lighting conditions as a bare minimum before you can start to drive that vehicle on the road. And why can't, that to me seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do that will not stifle any innovation. Just before you put it on the road, demonstrate that the thing can actually see. Just a human has to be able to see.
It's not like development stops in the meantime while you're figuring that stuff out either. There was the ARPA, was it ARPA or DARPA challenge where they were in basically makeshift cities.
Right.
Yeah, the urban challenge.
Yeah. So you can program a bunch of these things to be within a sort of geo-fenced area and try to run them into each other and have them learn how to avoid. You can do a lot of that stuff.
And we have those kinds of facilities. I mean, here,
Yeah.
Here in the Ann Arbor area, we've got two of them. My house is pretty much equidistant between them. You've got M City at the University of Michigan campus, and then a few miles away in the opposite direction here from me here is the American Center for Mobility, a 327-acre site that has been specifically built for testing autonomous and connected vehicles. And all the manufacturers have their own test facilities. Waymo's got a test facility in Central California that they use. So there's plenty of places where we can be testing this stuff while we go through, develop the standards, and actually start validating those vehicles before we start putting them back on the public roads.
Yeah, I think you're on the right track, Sam. And I think, I don't know if there's a difference in these things, but I don't know if you can call it a standard or, a gate that you have to pass through to, reach a certain minimum level of qualifications. It's tough though, because when you start talking about testing, it's like, okay, if you test this one scenario, that doesn't necessarily mean that, the car is going to react the same way in another scenario that's very similar, but not identical. So I think that's why we see, automakers and the likes of Waymo and others building up these libraries of scenarios that are, number in the tens of thousands at this point, if not more. And so, it kind of gets back to that conundrum. How do you can have all these tens of thousands of scenarios tested for, but it's the one that you don't know for sure, or, the one anomaly that is the one that winds up getting these companies in trouble. And, for it, maybe a much more mild example of that, thinking back to just, maybe 2-3 weeks ago when Starsky Robotics talked about their truck testing in Florida, and, they're going through their first fully driverless test. There's no human in the truck. And the power went out to the building where they have their remote operations. And when the connectivity to that building was lost in the truck, that was a kind of a key flag for their safety system. The truck stopped in the middle of the lane. So obviously a much more positive outcome. And I think that's kind of what you do want to see have happen when something goes unplanned. But I think it does speak to the fact that you can do all the planning in the world, or you can test all the scenarios that you can conceive of, but it's the one that you don't get to that winds up being a problem.
Right. And, I'm not saying that, that this is the be all and end all of testing and standards for automated vehicles. And the reality that everyone is going to have to accept, it's funny, we hear these people from these companies talking about this goal of getting to zero crashes and zero fatalities. And that's great as a goal. But I think, what we also need to have these same people talk about is the reality that while this may be the goal, the recognition that we're almost certainly never going to get there, in any kind of reasonable time frame, if ever. Right. It's going to be, the curve of, hopefully the way this works out is the curve of fatalities over time, is going to go down, and it's going to be an asymptotic curve that approaches zero but never quite gets there. As the technology gets better, it'll keep getting closer and closer. But there's always going to be some scenario that you can't deal with. Like in this particular case, on Monday when we first heard about the crash took place on Sunday night. When we first heard about it on Monday, the story that came out from the police that were investigating it was that this woman, was walking down the median, on this road in Tempe, Arizona, with her bicycle, and she suddenly went out into the street right in front of the vehicle. So it's entirely possible. It's totally realistic that if somebody decided they wanted to, end their life, they could jump out in front of an autonomous vehicle.
Yeah,
and the realities of physics are that no matter how good the system is, it might not be able to stop in time.
Correct, but no, this situation, I feel bad saying this, but you knew it was going to be Uber. doing this. They've proven that they're untrustworthy, and
it was highly likely to be Uber. Let's put it that way.
Sure. This situation is just bad in so many different ways. First of all, this is an XC90. So apparently city safety is disabled on these vehicles. This is the exact situation that city safety is designed for. It would have at least beeped at him. It did nothing. And I was, as we were sort of working up to this point, this has been chatter for quite a while. You brace yourself because you know that the first thing that the backup driver is going to say when this happens is there was no time to react. And no, of course not, because you're not paying attention. You're doing what everybody I see around me in traffic in the morning, stop and go traffic, is doing the same thing. They're all checking their phone. They're just distracted, And so, no, you're not going to catch it. It's going to be over before you even know what happened. And that's a whole other issue with partially automated systems, level 2 and level 3 systems that rely on the driver to still take over control from time to time. Yeah. And
in a way, it makes the argument for, this is a fork in the road for a lot of companies where some are saying, they want to take that progressive step to, high level 2 or level 3 vehicles where there's that mix of, or that handoff of control. And then you have others saying, we're skipping all that because it's too complicated. We're going to fully driverless. And, if there's anything about this Uber crash so far that sticks in my mind, regarding this issue, it's that it lends more credence to that theory that, that you don't want to bother with level 2 and level 3 because the driver involved, the human driver involved is a weak link.
Well, yes and no, though. I feel like a human driver would have, again, at least tried to swerve if they had been paying attention. So it kind of makes the argument for level 0. None of this seems like a great idea at this point.
Well, and that's that's exactly what this vehicle should have done, even in autonomous mode. Is it should have, and from watching the video, we've been talking up till now about what was said on Monday right after the crash, but this evening, a couple hours before we started recording tonight, the Tempe Police Department posted the video from the camera that was mounted in the vehicle. The two videos, one of the forward-looking camera looking down the road and the other one looking back at the safety driver. And, we found, when you watch that video, you'll see that what actually happened is very different from the story that we've been hearing for the last 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, this is a car that's bristling with, it's got radar and I'm assuming
radar, LiDAR, and cameras.
Right, LiDAR, and it doesn't have infrared.
But nobody's using infrared. But the radar and the LiDAR, even without the cameras that can't really see it in the dark, the radar and the LiDAR by themselves should have been able to detect this woman in complete darkness, because what we actually saw from the video is no, she did not jump out from the shadows. She visually, on the video, she appeared out of the shadows because she was wearing dark clothes, and once the headlights of the vehicle hit her, then suddenly she was visible, but there was no other traffic on the road. It was a clear night. There was no rain or snow or anything else. The car was in the right-hand lane of at least 2 lanes, and nobody in the left-hand lane. She was not running across. She was walking across. So she had walked across at least 1.5 lanes of traffic, or at least 1.5 lanes of this road, and maybe more, depending on exactly where it was. There might have also been a left turn lane. So she had been in the roadway for some time, unobstructed by any other vehicles or any other objects, not moving particularly fast. So those sensors should have easily been able to pick her up at a distance of at least 50 meters, probably as much as 150 meters or more, like 300 or 400 feet or more. And since the car was only going 38 miles an hour, at that speed, full brakes, it should easily be able to stop in 60 or 70 feet.
I mean, yeah, that's to me, there's a whole lot of inexplicability going on here, other than the backup driver wasn't attentive. But you have to design for that, because while he shares some culpability there with, being distracted and not doing your job. Like, that's human nature. You have to understand that that's going to happen. And you have to make the systems alert or in some way. And the cars are doing this. Like I was saying, city safety already does that. The Nissan that I had last week, it would push back on the brake pedal, or the gas pedal. I mean, if you push back on the brake pedal, it's not going to help you. It would push back on the gas pedal if it felt me getting too close to stuff. So some of these systems, they already work. The lane keeping systems and stuff. They can nudge the steering to initiate a swerve. It just sounds like none of that worked at all in any way. And even if it had, it might not have avoided the outcome here. But it's almost like it just didn't pick up on the fact that there was somebody in the roadway, and that. There's a lot of factors, right? Like the roadway itself and the intersection, and even the approved crossing or the official crossing that wasn't too far away. It's kind of poorly designed. So we have a lot of work to do.
I would venture to guess, looking at that intersection, and we don't have an exact distance figure yet on how far away she was when she was crossing, but. I would say she's at least 100 feet away from that intersection and from the crosswalk in particular, and probably more, which does lead to the fact that, this is that the design of that whole area is terrible. I mean, frankly, terrible. Like I was saying, I'm not a traffic engineer, but on the other hand, I don't think you have to be a traffic engineer to take a few quick glances of that area and note that there's this pedestrian island in the middle of the road with paths on it that kind of crisscross in an X, yet there's signs saying that pedestrians shouldn't cross the street using it, and those signs are facing the road and not the pedestrians who might be in the traffic island.
Yeah.
And then you're at least 100 feet and probably significantly more away from the crosswalk. I don't think I would venture to guess that 100 people crossing the street there would not walk up to the crosswalk. They would cross exactly where this lady did. And that definitely speaks to the design of the road and infrastructure there. It's not pedestrian friendly. It's car friendly.
Yeah. And at the end of the day too, pedestrians always have the right of way. So, and it's our job as drivers to watch out for them. And I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of a black eye for the whole industry. Some of the companies have been a lot more responsible than others, and I feel like maybe in a way we can get a positive out of it with understanding that, hey guys, it's been the Wild West, like you said. This is why they're in Arizona versus California, because California wanted them to be a lot more careful, and Arizona said, no, come on over.
Yeah, and I mean that's earlier on Pete mentioned that when Uber first started, when they first took their testing out of Pittsburgh, they started doing their testing in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago. They went to San Francisco, and even in California, to test on the roads in California, it's $150 fee to get a permit to test a vehicle on the roads in California, and Uber wouldn't even do that. I mean, they couldn't even be bothered to register and pay $150 fee. And within a day and a half before they finally bailed out of San Francisco, there were several videos posted showing these same vehicles running red lights and doing other having other close calls that there's no excuse for why those vehicles were even on the road at that point.
That's right. And, and to get into the specifics of that, that's precisely when the Arizona governor, Doug Ducey, started recruiting Uber testing via Twitter, saying that California was overregulated and that Arizona was open for business and that Uber should ditch California. I mean, there was nothing subtle about this. He was clearly trying to capitalize on the, arguments that Uber was having with the state of California at the time. And, I think in a lot of ways, everybody says, of course, safety comes first. But when people look at this as a business development opportunity, and kind of assume that the safety will come along with it. This, what we see this week here is kind of the result of
they need to flip that around. The safety needs to come first, and then the business.
It really does, and I think that, and there's really, I was just going to say, there's a balance of those things. There's not a balance. Safety comes first, and that's the end of it. But at the same time, like I said earlier, like in some respects, we don't expect these cars to be perfect, and somebody's going to get killed. So, how do you plan for safety as best you can while realizing we're never really going to get to absolute zero?
Well, that's what makes it so egregious in this instance, is that we all went into it, and we're all continuing to go into it with eyes open, saying, yeah, it's something bad and tragic is likely to happen. People still get hit by trains, and that's technology that's been around for a couple hundred years. The problem is that it seems like none of the planning for that worst case, or none of the care went into it. It was just, let's just go ahead and be sloppy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very true. And in this case, there is no care, or there's none of that, testing or certain standards to meet, or, to use the word regulation. There's very little of it. Arizona permits autonomous testing by executive order that, by and large, says that the cars have to meet federal motor vehicle safety standards. There's a little more nuance to it than that, but their executive order that's permits this essentially says, like, this is good for business development. It's like the second bullet point on the executive order, that low regulations and business friendly environments are the reason why they're doing this.
But that's really the crux of it. Is my personally held belief is that reasonable, smartly drawn up regulation does not chill business activity. You write the regulation together with the industry you want to regulate. The regulators and the regulated come together, and you compromise, and you come up with a framework that you can all live with. That's not happening. I don't think that by having an intelligent regulatory framework, you're going to chill business development. I mean, airlines do okay. and they're regulated. There's a lot of industries. Construction is regulated. Like, there are reasons why we regulate things that don't have to do with taking a bite out of their business. And so I'm not one that believes that regulation kills business. On the other hand, the very reason why Uber in particular is developing autonomous vehicles has nothing to do with anything other than replacing people with machines so they can maximize profit.
Or at least try to reduce their losses.
I guess they may never show profit.
I remain unconvinced that any company that does not already have some kind of manufacturing infrastructure and service and distribution infrastructure in place is going to be able to reach profitability anytime in the foreseeable future just by going to autonomous vehicles. Because the amount that they're going to have to invest to either buy physical assets that they currently don't have to deal with, maintain those assets, support them, over the life of the vehicle. There's a whole bunch of new. You eliminate the cost of the driver, but you're adding a whole bunch of new costs in there that companies like Uber and Lyft don't currently have.
So
I totally agree with that, Sam. I think you just hit the nail on the head. Like, the step away from the Arizona death, just the greater long-term future of the ride-sharing industry, in particular Uber and Lyft. Just thinking about them going from a very capital light business model to one where somebody's got to own the cars and take care of them is very different. And, so there's this reckoning with the autonomous technology coming, but then also with that model itself.
So, where does that leave us? Does this kind of incident or I guess even beyond this incident, does this industry look like something that is just at a certain point gonna fizzle, or what is the actual future involved for autonomous vehicles?
I don't think it's going to fizzle. I think the deployment is going to be slower than a lot of people have projected and made claims for. Certainly, people like Tony Seba at Stanford, have projected that 95% of all rides by 2030 are going to be in shared autonomous vehicles. I mean, that's just a completely ridiculous forecast.
Sounds like we're going to do some light rail, some buses.
Yeah. So I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to proceed at a little bit slower pace, and I think we're going to have some more of these incidents, before everything gets really well sorted out. And the thing is, the more of these incidents we have, the more it's going to hurt consumer confidence in the technology. And so even when it does get sorted out, they're going to be less likely to adopt the technology. But it'll happen eventually. I think it's going to be necessary to address some of the larger societal problems that we have to deal with around transportation and energy use.
Yeah, and I think that, to your point about consumer confidence, it's, almost bigger than that to me. It's, a handful of deaths are going to hurt that confidence in autonomous technology. But there's still this bigger problem that there's 102 people on average every day in the United States who are getting killed in car accidents, or I should say car crashes, not necessarily accidents when you factor in drunken driving and other kind of reckless behavior. But we get back to that existential question of why are we comfortable with humans killing each other, at a rate that's going to, exceed what machines would at some point. But we get very uncomfortable with machine-caused deaths.
Well, first of all, humans are not rational, and so we're not. We tend not to make decisions, based on pure logic. If we can save 10% of fatalities by going to automation, that would seem like a rational thing to do, but we probably won't do it if that's all we have. On the other hand, I think it's important to also keep in mind some scale and context. There's 274 million registered vehicles in the United States. We drive 3.2 trillion miles a year. And there's an average of just over one fatality for every 100 million miles of travel. By comparison, there's a few hundred autonomous vehicle prototypes in this country. They've accumulated roughly somewhere between 8 and 10 million miles total. And we've had one fatality. One fatality in, let's say, 10 million miles versus one fatality for every 100 million miles driven by humans. So far, we're not actually better yet. We haven't actually proved that the technology is better. I mean, obviously that's a sample size of one, and statistically that's not statistically significant. But the reality is we have not yet fundamentally proven that this is better than human drivers. I have no doubt that we will get there in the not too distant future, that we will validate that assumption, but we need to actually go a little farther down the road to get to that point.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and even say that I think we have to go a lot farther down the road. I think it was Toyota that said, we're going to need to get to like 1 trillion miles of testing before we really know. Like you said, our sample size right now is small, so it just speaks to the overall fact that there's a long, arduous path ahead.
Yeah, and a lot of that is going to be dependent on doing a whole lot of simulation testing. Waymo, I think, is doing something upwards of 10 million miles a day of simulation testing now. And at CES in January, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, was showing some of the new simulation capabilities that they have now, using the graphics rendering capabilities of their GPUs. They can take raw sensor data from vehicles that are being tested, and then they can take those scenarios and manipulate them and create an infinite number of potential scenarios, varying the lighting conditions and the weather conditions and the road conditions, and adding more vehicles in, adding pedestrians and other road users into those simulation runs, and run an infinite, almost infinite variety of scenarios much more rapidly than we could ever do on real roads.
I still hold out hope that there will be a backlash against our machine overlords, and we'll just decide that human drivers are where it's at. Because it's a NASA quote that I love from the 60s. It's human beings are the cheapest 150-pound general-purpose computers that you can mass produce with unskilled labor.
That's brilliant. I love that.
Pretty good.
That is excellent.
And from a conversation I had with Gil Pratt from Toyota, from the Toyota Research Institute, one of the things he mentioned was that the human brain, I think the power consumption of the human brain is about 4 watts. And we still don't have
efficient.
And we still don't have digital computers that can come anywhere close to general intelligence that the human brain is capable of. I mean, the human brain, for all of our flaws, we're actually remarkably good at detecting very subtle changes and detecting a lot of nuance in the things that our senses pick up. Because we've had to evolve that way to survive. Because in many ways, while we may be the apex predators on this planet, in many ways we're physically inferior to a whole lot of other species. And the fact that we have survived and dominated for so long is, it's testament to what our brains have been capable of.
I think I can't argue. I think we're good. You know what? Let's talk about something else.
Okay.
Let's go ahead, Pete.
No, I think that's a good segue away with the great stat with the 4-watt usage of the human brain. There's nowhere to go from there.
We really are dim bulbs, but we're good at it.
That's perfect. All right. So speaking of dim bulb moves, perhaps, Cadillac all of a sudden has decided they want to be in the V8 engine business again. The last time they did this was the North Star. The time before that was the HT series, the HT 4100. So now they've come out with a V8 that's going to be much better than either of those, and both of them put together. I don't know what the designation is for it, but it's a 4.2 liter twin turbo hot V thing. V8.
It's a competitor for the likes of Mercedes and BMW and everybody else that's doing these similar kind of high performance V8 engines.
And it's going to go in their sedan.
In the CT6.
Sell. Yeah,
right.
Seems like a terrible idea. I mean, like a wonderful terrible idea.
Well, don't you just think though? This is it is probably a terrible idea. Given the way the sedan market is going right now, and everything else in the industry. But at the same time, as Cadillac looks to establish itself or reestablish itself, as a competitor to Mercedes, BMW, that they have to have this kind of offering.
I think it's I think it's cool. I love V8s, and I think it's great that Cadillac has done in this dual overhead cam, aluminum. It has all the buzzwords, and that's cool. And
fully buzzword compliant.
Yeah, it makes a ton of power, and that's also cool. And they're putting it in the CT6, which I love, and it's going to make the CT6 V Sport. It's going to be great, and nobody's going to buy it because everybody's buying crossovers and luxury SUVs. So it's a lot of money to sink into an engine that's going in a sedan when sedans are sort of falling by the wayside. And Cadillac.
Yeah, but do you really believe that the CT6 is the only product that's going to get this engine?
Well, no, and that's my question is like, what else is it going to go into? And Cadillac doesn't really have anything else they can put it in right now. At least
they don't right now, but that doesn't mean they won't, because this engine isn't coming out for another year. So it comes out in the first half of 2019. And by that time they will have some additional new products that haven't yet been announced. They have.
So what are they, Sam? Why don't you tell us?
Well, they haven't told me yet either. But I mean, they have said that they're doing some more utility vehicles. I mean, they've got the XT4 coming next week at the New York Auto Show, which is a compact one.
That's right.
But
they're
going to have some bigger. They're going to have some bigger utilities as well. Plus, there's going to be a next generation Escalade that will probably be launching sometime in the middle of next year. And the other thing to keep in mind about this is this engine is going to be built at GM's Performance Build Center, which is where they build, do their high performance Corvette engines as well. The Performance Build Center just happens to be co-located in the Bowling Green assembly plant that builds Corvettes. And they're hand-built engines, by a couple of dozen technicians that, spend a few hours, putting each one of these together, and they slap a tag on it with their signature on it at the end. But if in fact Don Sherman is right, and there is going to be a mid-engine Corvette, which I'm still not convinced of. I still think it's GM's just trolling Don with some tube frame mock-ups running around just for the spy photographers. But Don has been on the mid-engine Corvette kick for 40 years, and when we were at this event the other day, he said, he's got a deposit down on a 2020 mid-engine Corvette with his local Chevrolet dealer. But it would not shock me at all to see this engine in the back of if they do a mid-engine vet, to see this engine in the back of a mid-engine Corvette with a hybrid powertrain.
That just sounds wrong.
Why not? I mean, you got hybrid, hybrid LaFerraris and the Porsche 918 and the McLaren P1, and McLaren's next high-end sports car is also going to be a hybrid. There's going to be a plug-in hybrid version of the next generation 911. Everything's getting electrified, to get the power levels they want. So why not put this, with a add 300 horsepower of electric motors, so you got all of a sudden now you're at 850 horsepower with a hybrid and a twin turbo V8. What could go wrong?
I just think back to Dan's point, that there's so many aspects of this that are cool, and that's that could happen just based on the fact that I don't know, Sam. Like, I don't know about the details, but like theoretically, that would be a cool thing for Cadillac to do. It just in that big picture of Cadillac reestablishing itself as something other than a moribund GM brand. Like all these ducks seem to be aligning. Yeah.
I think there's still a lot we don't know about what GM's plans are, and I'm glad this engine exists because I think it'll be a lot of fun to drive. But given GM's Mary Barr's stated mission of zero emissions, zero congestion, and zero fatalities, creating an engine like this obviously doesn't fit within that scope. But I think we're probably going to learn some other things, over the course of the next year or so that might just make this, make a little more sense with this thing.
Wait, did she commit to zero emissions, zero fatalities, zero? What was it?
Zero emissions, zero congestion, zero fatalities. That's GM's mission now.
Zero cars?
Well, it has been interesting. If you've noticed, I feel like, with Maven in particular, they've upped their game in terms of being more aggressive about talking about the fact that you don't need a car anymore. When Maven launched in Toronto, probably about a month ago, I think it was, their statement said like car ownership is no longer necessary. And I had to I had to read that a few times because like, wait a minute, this is coming from a GM brand saying that car ownership is no longer necessary. That it seemed crazy to me that they would just come out and say that.
And to varying degrees, we've been hearing that from a lot of automakers lately, and we're going to hear it more going forward because the thing is, all these autonomous cars, they're not going to be cars that individuals own. They're going to be through mobility services. So, in urban areas, the idea of owning a car is, it's not that it makes sense today. And, as I said, humans aren't rational anyway. So, it makes no sense to own a car in a place like Manhattan or even Chicago,
right?
When you can get access to a vehicle whenever you need it,
right?
That's very true. But people do it anyway. To your point,
in other cities, though, there isn't that public transportation or even bus routes like there are in cities like Manhattan. Manhattan is almost an outlier with its subway system, and public transportation is, as much as people complain about it in Manhattan, it's pretty good there. It's a lot harder in another sort of different tier of city to be carless. Houston is certainly designed around the car.
Phoenix,
Los Angeles.
Yeah. So, you can't make the same argument for other cities. You know what I mean? Like,
I think in this context of getting away from car ownership, I think the U.S. is probably not going to be the leader in this. We'll probably trail behind. I think we'll see it happening more in Europe and in Asia first, and eventually, the U.S. will kind of start to move in that direction. Because you're right. I mean, a lot of big American cities have been designed around the car, but there's a lot of other places in the world where that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with that. And there's options too. The right thing is going to come along at the right time. Somebody's going to maybe pitch fractional ownership of luxury vehicles in the right way, and that's going to become the thing versus owning your own car or something like that. And we're seeing everybody try a little bit of a different take on it, and something's going to stick. Part of the thing with ride sharing and this whole disruption of mobility stuff is these companies are basically undercutting actual, taxpayer funded public transportation, gutting it, and then using it as an excuse to sell their sort of privatized option. You look at Uber again, right? Their rides cost more than they charge.
Oh, a lot more.
Right. So once private equity gets tired of paying for everybody's car rides, either the prices are going to rise or, something else is going to change, or they're just going to fold up their tent. But it's going to be a few years from now. And what have they done to starve the subway system, say, in a place like Boston that is continually, it's the oldest in the nation and it has issues. If we don't have enough riders, we don't make enough money to pay to fix the system. So we've got to float a bond or we've got to do something else and just take the loss for a system that has declining ridership, and you can't make the business case. At a certain point, you go, like, you know what, we're not going to do that. So once they've gutted public transit, then what? Do they decide to continue at it, or, are we all stuck then and we have to, again, accept our new overlords?
Well, I think to some extent, like, that infrastructure investment in public transportation, has been made. And, although we do see it falling apart in places like Washington, D.C. with their metro, I think should we get into a scenario that, like the one that you just painted, like, I think public transportation will be resilient. Not that it doesn't have its fair share of problems. I don't think it's just going to, evaporate one day and not be able to reclaim territory that it may have lost in the interim.
I hope so. I don't know how we got there from turbocharged V8s. What happened? thought we were talking about cool stuff.
We are experts in
tangents. Gave us a hard right turn with Maven when we talked about the GM not being afraid to say that car ownership is no longer necessary.
Yeah. Wow, we did a tangent. I honestly can't wait to see what else this engine ends up in. I think the CT6 is going to be great, but they're not going to sell that many of it.
No, I mean, they don't sell very many CT6s now.
Right. So, I mean, how much money was it? $5 billion to develop an engine? $1 billion?
It's probably about $1 billion.
I mean, it's just so nonchalant. It's just $1 billion. It's just small money
compared to what they've spent on autonomous technology over the last 10 years. Yeah. That is probably small potatoes.
Because Jalopnik posted about how upset all the Elante owners are that it's the featured car at the Concours de Le Mans this year. And they just don't have a sense of humor. I read I think it was Classic and Motor Car, quick blurb about the Elante. GM lost like $24 billion on that one car. It's like, man, the 80s.
That can't be right.
I that's what it said, and I was like, that seems like a lot of money. Like $24 billion seems big.
I think they misplaced the decimal
might
point.
Might have been 24 million is probably okay. All right.
Well, no, I mean I could see them losing a couple of billion on that program.
Or so like 2.4.
Yeah.
That's still a lot of dough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you think about
and actually back to the V8. That $1 billion figure actually is that's the figure. That's what it costs to develop and also to tool up for manufacturing of an engine. The tooling cost for this engine is actually going to be pretty small because it's a low volume engine and it's hand built. They don't have to put in things like transfer lines for engine machining and building. That's where a lot of the cost goes into is building all that stuff out. And if you've got a low volume engine that you can machine all the parts on a CNC machine and then assemble it by hand, that cost so it might only be 250-300 million for this program, which again is not nothing, but
in automaker terms that's not nothing.
Yeah.
Well, I think Pete, you're going to have the direct line to Don Sherman. He writes for Car and Driver, so I mean, you're going to know before any of us if he gets an advanced call about a mid-engine Corvette with this engine in it.
I'll listen for a shout of joy coming from somewhere else in the office.
Yeah. He may just keel over. It may be like one of those things like, he'll
have a stroke that it's finally real.
Like Xanadu. Yeah.
All right.
I think it's going to be in the Escalade next, but that's just my thought.
No, I think you're probably right. Escalade V Sport.
That'd be okay. I'd take it. All right. Well, I think we've obliterated a podcast this time.
At least.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple of them.
About this engine. Speaking.
Yeah.
You had an interview.
I had a short interview with Jordan Lee, who's the chief engineer on the engine, and we'll drop that in here, and then we'll wrap up the show.
All right, Jordan Lee, chief engineer for Cadillac V8. Got Cadillac's first exclusive V8 since the North Star, I guess. So probably since the early '90s. So first of all, what were your goals in developing this engine overall and for Cadillac?
Primarily the goals were trying to match all the Cadillac's requirements for elegant performance, and we talked about it earlier in the presentation. But we want elegance. Elegance means refined, responsive, extremely powerful, and very intuitive. We wanted to do all of those things. So the requirements that we were given, we looked at a lot of different powertrains and engine options that we could use to achieve. But this particular one, you have it up there on the slide now, we went with a clean sheet approach because we really had to emphasize the elegant, refined, powerful, and efficient. So that generated what we came up with, which is this 4.2-liter Cadillac twin-turbo V8.
And what do you see as the targets, the who's the target market for this engine? What are you trying to achieve with it?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Donnie on the market demographics, but
so this luxury customer is somebody who looks for refinement, as is the case with the CT6. Is somebody who's looking to reward themselves, but break out of the status quo. With this, you're looking at people who want the pinnacle of performance without having to give up any sacrifice on luxury.
Okay. This is clearly a very tightly packaged engine. There's a lot of hardware within this envelope. What were the biggest challenges for your team in developing this to get it to all go together and to stay together over the life of the vehicle?
Yeah, most of the engine-specific components we have a lot of experience, and my team is really good at doing engine designs and engine component work. But the biggest challenge for us, which was a new learning, was the thermal management, because the turbos and the converters in the valley of the engine. Our analytical capability, I think, is extraordinary, so we had a pretty good idea what we were up against, but until we started driving cars and prototypes, we really didn't understand how much attention had to be paid to managing the heat that those turbos and the converters generate in the valley of the engine.
Is this the first application that you're aware of that anybody's done with having the catalytic converters in the valley alongside the turbos like that?
No. Audi, BMW, and Mercedes now have hot V engines, and I think they also bolt their converters right to the turbochargers.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier the after-run cooling. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and what exactly are you doing there?
Yeah, with the turbocharger, if you're driving the car in a very spirited fashion, you get the turbos very hot, and then you immediately turn the engine off, you have no circulation of coolant or oil through the turbos. And the bearings in the turbocharger are oil-fed. If you recall, long ago, Chrysler had a turbocharged four-cylinder and a vehicle called the Omni,
right.
And they suffered oil coking issues which destroyed the turbocharger. So we have to make very certain that the oil temperature in the turbo never exceeds a coking threshold, or else we'll damage the turbocharger bearings. So for this particular design, with the turbos being up high in the valley, if somebody drove the car and got the turbos very hot and then immediately turned it off, we have to have an after-run fan and after-run pump that'll actually pull coolant through those turbos to dissipate the heat to get the temperatures below the threshold for oil coking.
So you have a separate electric cooling pump that only runs after the engine shuts off?
Correct.
And while the engine's running, you're still using the normal belt-driven pump?
Yes. Well, the engine's running, everything's fine. There's never an issue. It's when everything's hot and toasty and you turn the engine off that you have to make sure you lower the temperature of the turbos so you don't bake the oil.
So what other features are unique to this particular design? You got the after-run cooling.
Yeah, the after-run
cooling.
What about
the O2 sensors right in the catalytic converter?
That actually is relatively new for us, and the industry is looking at doing more designs like that because it results in a very compact catalytic converter. And I won't go into all the details on the diagnostics, but we have to diagnose that the converter is actually doing its job, and we do that with what we call a split can converter. We're actually measuring the performance of the converter by running it a little bit rich and make sure this O2 sensor responds accordingly, and then the back converter actually cleans up whatever enrichment occurs to do that diagnostic. But in the old conventional sense, we had to have enough space to have two separate converters. New technology allows us to coat that converter, the front of the brick and the rear of the brick, and then we drill a hole and stick the O2 sensor in the brick itself, and we're able to do that same diagnostic but in a much more compact space.
So it's right on the boundary line between the two halves of the brick? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it results in a very compact space. The other unique things on the engine that was a challenge was the CACs, charge air cooling, and getting enough charge air cooling from a very compact charge air cooler. Now, there's not a lot of underhood space for big charge air coolers, so these things had to be very efficient. And as John mentioned, we can reduce the temperature by over 130 degrees Fahrenheit when you're running in a very spirited fashion.
And that's a liquid to air cooler?
Yes, it's a liquid to air. Yeah.
And so how much power is this engine going to produce in final form?
550 horsepower.
Not too shabby.
No, it should be very good. And John, I've made John commit before we gave the reviews today, because once we go public, we have to deliver. In the past, sometimes we're not certain, we're a little bit vague, and we estimate low. We didn't estimate low, so we have to hit this number.
All right, and to launch, this engine is only going to be available in the CT6 V-Sport, that's correct?
Correct.
New model? Okay. All right, thank you very much, Jordan Lee.
All right.
All right.
Pete, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to hear more about something that's non-autonomous. So, this was a cool discussion. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Sure. I want to have a larger role in your auto buying discussions. So when you're in the thick of sort of arguing one car versus the other, especially if there's a spousal disagreement, you let me know. I will probably not be helpful.
Well, I will keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And I really am kind of curious to see what we wind up doing, but it'll be fun however it goes.
Yeah, well, come back on when you make the purchase decision, and we'll talk about the hows, whats, and whys. I think that'd be a good thing.
That sounds good.
Excellent. All right, well, thanks everybody for listening. We'll catch you all next time.
All right, bye.
Good night. Bye.
Thanks.
All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to leave up holiday decorations year-round. Others have the need to use their garage as practice space for their new metal band. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico.